Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
This whole buzz about the middle corridor, how realistic is it in the first place, and do you see Georgia's role there?
I don't know. I think sometimes, but I'm now talking about my own country, we have a lot of slogans, and a lot of times I don't know what they mean. Middle corridor, Indo-Pacific strategy, pivot to Asia. None of these things are very meaningful until I see concrete initiative that has financial resources behind them. And for the middle corridor, let me give you an example. People criticize China's Belt and Road strategy. And there's a lot of room for criticism of China's Belt and Road strategy. But what I know is the Chinese government committed $1 trillion to the Belt and Road strategy. So you know it's real because it's substantive, it's got big money behind it, and they're actually doing things. So middle corridor, what's the budget for the middle corridor? In Washington terms, when we come up with these slogans, and it's all administrations do this, right? Let's say, to take a different administration, let's say Obama pivot to Asia. Because I live in Washington or outside Washington, I say, well, what's the budget for pivot to Asia? If you cannot tell me what the budget is, maybe you don't really have a program. It's just a slogan, it's just words. And so one difficulty I have with the middle corridor is what's behind it? What are the resources, real resources, including financial resources, but not only, that's behind this? Whether it is the EU talking about, EU signing a memorandum of understanding with some Central Asian country or with Azerbaijan, that doesn't mean, I don't know what that means. It's just a good intentions, yeah? So what is the budget for this? The other thing, I find it hard because of the geography and the distances involved is I don't see how you can have a middle corridor be economically feasible, viable, profitable even, without China involved. No, because China is the world's largest trader in goods. So, and obviously they could potentially benefit from the middle corridor, right? But if they're not involved, then it's like you're taking maybe half of the equation, maybe even more, out of the picture and say, we can do this without China. And I'm not sure that that's possible.
Mm-hmm. That leads me to the question on Anaclea port in Georgia, because we've heard how important that project is for Georgia, and it gains even more importance in these circumstances. Who will be interested in investing in this port, Mr. Chow, at these circumstances? We see some Kazakh investors that are interested, Chinese investors that are also interested. What should be approach towards these investments? Because we remember U.S. Secretary General saying that, if I were Georgia, I would avoid Russian and Chinese investments in this.
I think, particularly as it relates to China, that was a mistake. I remember early days when the Anaclea port idea was first discussed, that I know, because again, I'm in Washington, that US officials discouraged Georgian company and Georgian government to allow the Chinese in. I think that was a mistake at the time. I said that at the time. But you know, I understand Georgians getting pressure from these big guys in Washington saying, don't do it. But I don't know how it's feasible without it. Infrastructure, large infrastructure projects, require some commitment on the part of big users of that infrastructure. And by commitment, I don't mean just a promise. I mean a financial commitment that they're going to use the sport to transit X amount of goods over a long period of time. Otherwise, banks won't finance because you don't have a committed user of your service. How are they going to finance, right? And so you could see Kazakhstan would be a very good investor because they could benefit. You could see even Middle Eastern investors wanting to participate in something like a Nakhlia port project. But if you take the biggest possible customer out of the picture, how are you going to do it? It's going to be much more difficult, if not impossible, to do. If it was done in the proper way, by Western business standards, it's also a way of including China to participate in a project that also not only helps Georgia, but helps the West and so on. And so that we get used to being partners playing by proper rules of the game, which is the right thing to insist on, rather than saying, oh, just ban Chinese companies altogether. Well, I don't know, as someone who used to work on developing large infrastructure projects for oil and gas, I don't know how you do that. It would be like saying that we want to build Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan, but we can't allow Azerbaijan to be a part owner of the project. Well, how can you? All the oil is coming from Azerbaijan, right? So if they don't commit to using it, you know, you're going to build it for the who's going to pay the money to do it. So to me, China has to be part of the equation. Doesn't mean that China should dictate all the terms or anything like that. But I think it's a much more difficult project to do without China. And there, I guess I differ from the sometimes official American position.
Thank you so much. And my last question about the Black Sea Cable project, is it also a slogan, or do you see some future for that project?
I probably don't know enough about it, but I think there's a possibility the Black Sea Cable project just makes sense as in terms of regional integration without necessarily, but a deep water port costing billions of dollars is I think, again, you know, if I were a commercial developer,
we have to ask Washington questions there as well.
If I were a commercial developer, I would want to include the largest potential customer, not chase them away.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.